Richard Thompson never imagined his life could change so dramatically in just one morning. At 35, he owned 3 companies, lived in a mansion that could fit 20 families, and drove cars worth more than most people's houses. His tech business had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Everyone wanted to be his friend, everyone wanted his attention, and everyone thought he had the perfect life. But perfect lives, as Richard would soon learn, can crumble faster than a house of cards in a storm. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. Richard was in his home office, reviewing quarterly reports, when he heard car doors slamming outside. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, he saw black SUVs parked in his circular driveway. Men in dark suits and badges were walking toward his front door. The FBI agents who entered his home that morning were polite but firm. They had search warrants, court orders, and very serious expressions. While they searched through his files and computers, Richard called his lawyer, completely confused about what was happening. "Sir, you're going to want to sit down for this," Agent Martinez told him. "We have evidence that someone has been stealing money from your companies. A lot of money, over $200 million. Richard felt like the room was spinning. $200 million? That was impossible. He trusted his business partner completely. Daniel Hayes had been his friend since college. They had built their first company together in Richard's garage. Daniel was like a brother to him. "There must be some mistake," Richard said, his voice shaking. "Daniel would never steal from me. We've been best friends for 15 years. Agent Martinez showed him bank statements, wire transfers, and email conversations. The evidence was overwhelming. Daniel had been moving money to secret accounts in different countries for almost 3 years. He had been using his position as the company's chief financial officer to hide his tracks perfectly. But the worst part was still coming. "Mr. Thompson, we also have evidence that your wife was involved in this scheme," Agent Martinez said gently. "She was providing inside information about your business deals and personal finances." Richard's legs gave out. He sat down hard in his leather chair, the same chair where he had made million-dollar deals, where he had celebrated his biggest victories. Now it felt like he was sitting in quicksand. His wife, Catherine, had been acting strange for months. She was always on her phone, always going out with friends, always too busy to spend time with him or their twins. But he had assumed she was just going through a phase. Rich people's wives got bored sometimes, he thought. He never imagined she was planning to destroy him. The investigation moved quickly. Within days, the newspapers were calling it the Silicon Valley Love Triangle Scandal. Catherine and Daniel had not only been stealing his money, they had also been having an affair for over 2 years. The woman he loved and the friend he trusted had been meeting in hotel rooms while planning how to take everything he had worked for. When Catherine filed for divorce 2 weeks later, Richard finally understood how clever their plan had been. She wasn't just leaving him for another man. She was taking half of everything he owned, including the companies that were now frozen by the federal investigation. Her lawyers were ruthless. They painted Richard as a workaholic husband who ignored his family. They said Catherine deserved compensation for all the years she spent supporting his career while raising their children. They claimed she had no idea about Daniel's criminal activities and was just an innocent victim caught in the middle. The divorce proceedings were a nightmare. Catherine demanded the mansion, half the business assets, and full custody of their 8-year-old twins, Anna and Peter. She moved the children to her sister's house across the country, claiming she needed to protect them from the media circus surrounding their father. Richard's lawyers tried their best, but the timing was terrible. With the federal investigation ongoing, most of his assets were frozen. The courts couldn't tell the difference between money he had earned legally and money that Daniel had stolen. Everything was tied up in legal red tape. "I'm sorry, Richard," his head lawyer told him during one particularly difficult meeting. "With the criminal case pending and the media attention, the judge is being very cautious. Catherine's team is using the scandal to their advantage." Richard watched helplessly as his life was divided up like pieces of a pie. The mansion went to Catherine. The vacation home went to Catherine. The art collection, the boat, even his favorite, classic car collection, everything went to Catherine. The court said it was temporary until the criminal case was resolved, but Richard knew better. By the time the legal system figured everything out, there would be nothing left to fight for. The media made everything worse. Reporters camped outside his temporary apartment. Photographers followed him to the grocery store. Online articles called him everything from a criminal mastermind to a foolish husband who couldn't see what was happening in his own home. The comment sections were brutal. Strangers who had never met him decided he deserved everything that was happening to him. His friends disappeared one by one. The same people who used to invite him to fancy parties and exclusive events suddenly stopped calling. Business associates who used to laugh at his jokes and ask for his advice now avoided him completely. Being associated with a federal investigation was bad for their reputations, they said. The twins were allowed to visit him once a month, but Catherine made even those visits difficult. She would drop them off late and pick them up early. She told them Daddy was going through a hard time and they shouldn't ask him too many questions. Anna and Peter, who used to run to him with hugs and stories about school, now seemed scared and confused. "Daddy, are you going to jail?" Anna asked him during one visit. "Why can't we live with you anymore?" Peter wanted to know. Richard tried to explain in words an 8-year-old could understand. But how do you tell your children that the people they trust most in the world had betrayed their family? How do you explain that their mother had helped steal their college funds and their future security? The worst part was the loneliness. Richard had spent his whole adult life surrounded by people, employees, business partners, friends, family. His phone used to ring constantly with invitations, deals, and opportunities. Now days would go by without anyone calling him except lawyers and reporters. He moved from his temporary luxury hotel to a small apartment in a neighborhood he had never seen before. The place had one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and windows that looked out at a parking lot instead of the ocean. At night, he would lie awake listening to sirens and traffic, remembering when his biggest problem was choosing which car to drive to work. His grandmother's trust fund was the only money he could access. She had set it up when he was young, with rules that protected it from creditors, divorces, and legal troubles. It was enough to pay rent and buy groceries, but it was a fraction of what he used to spend on lunch. There was one person who didn't abandon him during those dark months. Rose Williams had been working as his family's housekeeper for 5 years. She was a 52-year-old woman who had raised 3 children on her own after her husband died in a military accident. When the scandal broke and Richard had to let go all his household staff, Rose was the only one who kept checking on him. She would show up at his apartment with containers of homemade soup and fresh bread. She would clean his small space and make sure he was eating properly. When Richard asked why she was helping him when he could no longer pay her, Rose just smiled. "Mr. Richard, I've been cleaning houses for 20 years, she said in her gentle voice. "I've seen a lot of rich people lose their money. Most of them were mean to people like me when they had everything. You were never mean. You always said, 'Please and thank you.' You remembered my children's names and asked about their school. That tells me who you really are." As Richard sat in his empty apartment that first winter, watching the rain through his small window, he realized he had learned something important. Money could buy many things, but it couldn't buy loyalty. It couldn't buy real friendship. And it certainly couldn't buy back the trust of the people you loved most. The federal agents had taken his computers, his files, and his business. Catherine and Daniel had taken his money, his home, and his children. The media had taken his reputation. But somehow, a woman who cleaned houses for a living had seen something in him that no one else had bothered to look for. Richard didn't know it yet, but Rose Williams was about to become the most important person in his life. And the small apartment that felt like a prison was about to become the place where he would learn what really mattered in this world. Winter turned into spring, but Richard couldn't feel any difference. His small apartment felt like a cave where he hid from the world. Some days he didn't even bother getting dressed. He would sit on his old couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how his life had become such a mess. The depression hit him like a heavy blanket that he couldn't throw off. Getting out of bed became a struggle. Taking a shower felt like climbing a mountain. Even simple things like making coffee or checking his mail seemed pointless. What was the point of anything when everything you had worked for was gone? His lawyer called every few weeks with updates that were always bad news. The federal case against Daniel was moving slowly. Catherine had filed more legal papers demanding additional money for the children's expenses. The frozen assets were still frozen. The media was still writing articles about him, calling him either a criminal or a fool, sometimes both in the same story. The worst part was not seeing Anna and Peter. Catherine had moved them to her sister's house in another state, claiming she needed to protect them from the negative attention their father was receiving. The court had given Richard visitation rights, but Catherine found ways to make every visit difficult. "The children are busy with school activities," she would tell the court-appointed mediator. "They need stability right now, not the stress of traveling back and forth." Richard's phone calls to his twins were limited to 30 minutes twice a week, and even those were supervised. Anna and Peter sounded different each time he spoke to them. They were more distant, more formal, like they were talking to a stranger instead of their father. "Are you coming to my school play, Daddy?" Anna asked during one call. "I want to come, sweetheart, but it's complicated right now," Richard had to explain. "Mommy says you're too busy with your problems to visit us," Peter said quietly. Richard's heart broke a little more with each conversation. His children were growing up without him, and there was nothing he could do about it. The money from his grandmother's trust fund was running low. The small amount she had left him was enough for basic living expenses, but lawyer fees were expensive, and the legal battles seemed to go on forever. Richard had to fire his expensive legal team and hire a public defender who was handling dozens of other cases. "I'm doing my best for you, Mr. Thompson," the overworked public defender told him. "But Catherine's team has unlimited resources. They can drag this out as long as they want." Richard started having panic attacks. His chest would tighten, his hands would shake, and he couldn't breathe properly. He had never experienced anxiety like this before. When you're rich and successful, you don't worry about paying rent or buying food. Now, every bill that arrived in his mailbox felt like a threat. He stopped answering his phone because the only people who called were reporters asking for interviews or strangers who had somehow gotten his number and wanted to yell at him about things they had read online. He stopped checking his email because his inbox was full of hate messages from people who blamed him for Daniel's crimes. One evening in late spring, Richard was sitting in his dark apartment, staring at a bottle of sleeping pills he had gotten from a doctor. The label said, "Take one for sleep." But Richard was thinking about taking all of them. He was tired of being tired of being alone, tired of missing his children, tired of having no money, no friends, and no hope. He was holding the bottle, thinking about how much easier everything would be if he just stopped trying, when he heard a knock at his door. "Mr. Richard, it's Rose. I brought you some dinner." Richard almost didn't answer. He didn't want Rose to see him like this, unshaven in the same clothes he had worn for 3 days, holding a bottle of pills like a man who had given up on life. But Rose was persistent. She knocked again, more firmly this time. "I know you're in there, Mr. Richard. I saw your car in the parking lot. Open the door, please." When Richard finally opened the door, Rose took one look at him and pushed her way into the apartment. She set down a container of homemade stew and some fresh bread on his kitchen counter, then turned to face him with her hands on her hips. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" she asked. Richard couldn't remember. He had been living on cereal and delivery pizza for weeks. Rose noticed the pill bottle in his hand. She didn't lecture him or get dramatic. She just walked over and gently took the bottle from his fingers. "Tell me what you're thinking about, Mr. Richard." And somehow Richard found himself talking. He told Rose about the panic attacks, about missing his children, about feeling like a failure as a father and a husband. He told her about the loneliness, about how everyone had abandoned him, about how he didn't see any way forward. Rose listened, without interrupting. She had seen hard times before. She had lost her husband when her children were young and had to rebuild her entire life from nothing. She knew what rock bottom looked like. "You know what I think?" Rose said when Richard finished talking. "I think you're feeling sorry for yourself." Richard was surprised. He expected sympathy, not tough love. "Your children need their father," Rose continued. "Not the rich man who used to buy them expensive toys. Just their father, the man who loves them and wants to protect them. That man is still here, even if the money isn't." She told Richard about her own struggles after her husband died. How she had worked 3 jobs while going to nursing school. How she had to choose between buying groceries and paying the electric bill. How she had felt like giving up many times but couldn't because her children were depending on her. "The hardest thing about losing everything," Rose said, "is learning who you really are when you don't have anything to hide behind. Rich people hide behind their money. Poor people hide behind their excuses. But when you're in between, when you have nothing left to hide behind, that's when you find out what you're really made of." Rose had brought someone with her that evening. Her 19-year-old son, Tyler. He was a quiet young man studying computer programming at the community college. He had always been fascinated by technology and had been following Richard's career for years. "Mr. Thompson, I know this sounds weird," Tyler said, "but I've been researching your case online. I think there's something the FBI missed." Tyler explained that he had been studying the public court documents and news reports about Daniel's crimes. As a computer science student, he understood how digital transactions worked better than most people. He had noticed some inconsistencies in the evidence that had been released to the public. "The investigators found the money Daniel stole, but I think he stole more than they realized. There are patterns in the data that suggest he was using cryptocurrency and overseas accounts that aren't in any of the reports." Richard was intrigued despite his depression. Tyler was smart, and he had fresh eyes on the case. Maybe he had noticed something that the overworked federal agents had missed. Rose started visiting Richard twice a week, always bringing food and always checking to make sure he was taking care of himself. Tyler came with her sometimes, bringing his laptop and showing Richard the research he was doing. Slowly, very slowly, Richard started to feel something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Tyler discovered that Daniel had been moving money through a network of shell companies that were registered in different countries. The FBI had found some of these companies, but not all of them. Tyler's research suggested there might be millions of dollars that were still unaccounted for. "If we can prove Daniel stole more money than anyone knows," Tyler explained, "it might change everything about your case. It could prove that you really were a victim, not a partner in his crimes." Rose encouraged Richard to start small. She helped him create a simple daily routine. Get up at a reasonable hour, take a shower, eat 3 meals, go for a walk around the neighborhood. She made sure he was taking care of his physical health while Tyler helped him focus on clearing his legal problems. "You can't help your children if you don't help yourself first," Rose reminded him whenever he felt like giving up. Richard started volunteering at Tyler's community college, helping students with business and entrepreneurship classes. It felt good to be useful again, to share his knowledge and experience with young people who still had hope for their futures. The students didn't care about his legal troubles or his failed marriage. They just wanted to learn from someone who had built successful companies. Teaching them reminded Richard that he still had valuable skills and knowledge, even if he didn't have money. One day, after Richard had been working with the students, for several weeks Tyler came to him with exciting news. "Mr. Thompson, I found something big. I think I found where Daniel hid the missing money." Tyler had discovered a series of cryptocurrency transactions that led to accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. The transactions were small and spread out over time, but they added up to nearly $50 million that wasn't part of the original FBI investigation. "We need to take this to the authorities," Richard said. "We will," Tyler replied. "But first, I want to make sure we have everything documented perfectly. This could be the evidence that changes everything." For the first time in almost a year, Richard went to bed that night feeling like his life might have a future after all. Rose and Tyler had given him something more valuable than money. They had given him hope and a reason to keep fighting. Tyler's discovery changed everything. The evidence he found wasn't just about money. It was about proving Richard's innocence and exposing the full extent of Daniel and Catherine's betrayal. But gathering proof that would hold up in court was going to be much harder than finding suspicious transactions on a computer screen. Richard's small apartment became their unofficial headquarters. Tyler would arrive every evening after his college classes, carrying his laptop and a backpack full of energy drinks. Rose would come by with dinner for all three of them, then stay to help organize their research. The kitchen table was covered with printed documents, bank statements, and legal papers. "We need to be very careful here," Richard warned them during one of their planning sessions. "If we make any mistakes, if we break any laws while gathering this evidence, it could hurt my case instead of helping it." Tyler understood. He had been studying computer forensics and knew the difference between legal research and illegal hacking. Everything they were doing used only publicly available information: court documents, business registrations, and financial reports that companies were required to file with the government. "I'm not breaking into anyone's computer," Tyler explained. "I'm just following the paper trail that's already out there. Daniel was smart about hiding the money, but he wasn't smart enough to hide all the legal documents." The first breakthrough came when Tyler discovered that Daniel had been using Richard's identity to register shell companies in other countries. He had forged Richard's signature on documents that created fake businesses in Panama and Switzerland. These companies existed only on paper, but they were used to move stolen money around the world. "This is huge," Richard said when Tyler showed him the evidence. "If Daniel was forging my signature, it proves I wasn't part of his scheme. The FBI needs to see this." But before they could go to the authorities, they needed more proof. Tyler's research had shown them where to look, but they needed help from people who had access to information they couldn't get from public records. That's when Rose's network became invaluable. Rose had worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families for over 20 years. She knew other domestic workers, maids, nannies, drivers, gardeners, who worked for rich people all over the city. These workers were invisible to their employers, but they saw and heard everything that happened in those houses. "Rich people talk like we're not even there," Rose explained to Richard and Tyler. "They have arguments in front of us, take phone calls while we're cleaning, leave important papers on their desks where we dust around them. They forget that we have eyes and ears." Rose reached out to her friend Linda, who had been working as a nanny for Catherine's sister. Linda had been taking care of Anna and Peter since Catherine moved them across the country. She had witnessed many private phone calls between Catherine and Daniel, conversations where they talked about money and legal strategies. "Miss Catherine doesn't think I understand English very well," Linda told Rose during a phone call. "But I hear everything. She's been talking to Mr. Daniel about moving more money before the government finds it." Linda also had heartbreaking news about the children. Anna had been asking constantly about her father, wondering why he never called anymore. Catherine had been telling the twins that their father was too busy with his legal problems to care about them. "The little girl cries at night sometimes," Linda whispered. "She misses her daddy so much. I try to comfort her, but what can I say?" Rose's friend Michael was a driver for one of Daniel's business associates. He had overheard conversations about secret meetings and overseas bank accounts. Maria, who cleaned the office building where Daniel used to work, had found shredded documents in trash cans that might be important evidence. One by one, Rose's network of invisible workers began sharing information. They weren't doing it for money. Most of them barely had enough to pay their own bills. They were doing it because they had watched Richard treat Rose and other workers with respect and kindness for years. They remembered how he always said please and thank you, how he learned their names and asked about their families. "Mr. Richard was never mean to people like us," Maria explained. "When my son was in the hospital, he sent flowers and asked if I needed time off work. Rich people don't usually care about their employees' problems." Tyler compiled all this information into a detailed timeline. He created charts showing how money moved from Richard's companies to Daniel's hidden accounts, then to shell companies around the world. The evidence was overwhelming, but they still needed official proof that would convince a judge. That's when Richard made a difficult decision. He decided to start a small consulting business, using what was left of his grandmother's trust fund to pay for a business license and basic equipment. He would help other small business owners avoid the financial mistakes that had made Daniel's crimes possible. "I can't just sit here waiting for the legal system to save me," Richard told Rose and Tyler. "I need to start rebuilding my life even if I don't know how this case will end." Rose became his business manager, handling phone calls and scheduling appointments. Tyler built a simple website and helped Richard create presentations about financial security for small businesses. They started slowly, with Richard speaking at community college business classes and local entrepreneur meetups. The business grew faster than they expected. Other business owners had heard about Richard's case in the news, and they wanted to learn from his experience. They weren't interested in gossip about his failed marriage or his legal troubles. They wanted practical advice from someone who had learned expensive lessons about trust and financial controls. "People respect honesty," Rose observed as she scheduled Richard's third speaking engagement that month. "You're not pretending everything is fine. You're telling them exactly what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening to them." Richard found that talking about his mistakes publicly was actually healing. For months, he had been ashamed of what happened to him. Now he was turning his painful experience into something that could help other people protect themselves and their families. Tyler's investigation was also making progress. He had found evidence of additional shell companies that Daniel had created using stolen identities. Some of these companies were still active, which meant money might still be moving through them. "Mr. Thompson, I think Daniel is still stealing money," Tyler told him one evening. "Some of these accounts show recent activity. He might be accessing funds from prison through associates on the outside." This was the evidence they needed to take to the FBI. If Daniel was still committing crimes while in federal custody, it would prove that his criminal network was bigger than anyone had realized. But just as they were preparing to contact the authorities, they received shocking news. Catherine's lawyer called Richard with an unexpected offer. "My client is willing to settle the divorce case," the lawyer said. "She'll agree to shared custody of the children and a more reasonable division of assets. She wants to put this whole situation behind her and focus on the children's well-being." Richard was suspicious. Catherine had been fighting him viciously for over a year. Why would she suddenly want to settle? Tyler had a theory. "I think she's scared," he said. "If our evidence proves that Daniel stole more money than anyone knew, it might also prove that she knew more about his crimes than she admitted. She could face criminal charges herself," Rose agreed. "Guilty people don't usually offer to be reasonable unless they're trying to avoid something worse." The three of them had to make a strategic decision. Should Richard accept Catherine's settlement offer and focus on getting his children back? Or should they continue investigating and risk everything on the chance that they could prove his complete innocence? "I want my kids back more than anything," Richard admitted. "But if I accept this deal, Daniel and Catherine get away with destroying my life. Other people might suffer the same way if we don't expose the truth." Rose put her hand on Richard's shoulder. "This isn't just about you anymore, Mr. Richard. Tyler and I have invested months of our lives in this fight. We believe in you and we believe in getting justice, but the decision has to be yours." Tyler nodded in agreement. "Whatever you decide, we're with you. But I think we're close to finding something big. The evidence we've gathered so far is just the beginning." Richard looked around his small apartment, at the kitchen table covered with research, at the two people who had become his closest friends and allies. A year ago, he had been a billionaire with a mansion full of expensive things, and a phone full of contacts who called themselves friends. Now he lived in a tiny apartment with second-hand furniture, but he had something more valuable than he had ever possessed before, people who truly cared about him and believed in him. "Let's keep fighting," Richard decided. "My children deserve to know the truth about what happened to our family, and other families deserve to be protected from people like Daniel and Catherine." As summer turned to fall, their investigation was about to uncover secrets that would shock everyone involved. In the case, including the federal agents who thought they had already found all of Daniel's hidden crimes. Richard's decision to keep fighting changed everything. Within 2 weeks of rejecting Catherine's settlement offer, Tyler made the discovery that would blow the entire case wide open. "Mr. Thompson, you need to see this right now," Tyler said, bursting into the apartment with his laptop. His hands were shaking with excitement. "I found it! I found where Daniel hid the rest of the money." The evidence Tyler had uncovered was staggering. Daniel hadn't just stolen $200 million. He had stolen over $400 million. He had been moving money for almost 5 years, not 3. The additional theft had been so carefully hidden that even the FBI's financial experts had missed it. "Look at this," Tyler said, pointing to his computer screen. "Daniel created an entire network of fake companies. Some of them have been operating since before you even made him your business partner. I think he planned this whole thing from the very beginning." Richard felt sick to his stomach. His oldest friend, the man he had trusted like a brother, had been plotting to destroy him for years. Every business decision they had made together, every celebration, every family dinner, Daniel had been planning Richard's downfall the entire time. But Tyler's research revealed something even more shocking. Catherine hadn't just helped Daniel in the final years of their marriage. She had been involved from the beginning. Bank records showed that she had been receiving payments from Daniel's shell companies for over 4 years, long before their affair became romantic. "She married you as part of the plan," Rose said quietly when she saw the evidence. "This wasn't a marriage that went wrong. This was a business arrangement designed to rob you." The weight of the betrayal was overwhelming, but Richard felt something unexpected alongside the pain. Relief. For months, he had been blaming himself for not being a good enough husband, for working too much, for missing the signs that his marriage was failing. Now he knew the truth. There was nothing he could have done differently. Catherine and Daniel had never given him a real chance. Tyler's evidence was professional quality, but they needed law enforcement to verify it before taking it to court. Richard contacted Agent Martinez, the FBI investigator who had searched his house on that terrible Tuesday morning almost 2 years ago. "Mr. Thompson, I have to admit, we thought we had found everything," Agent Martinez said after reviewing Tyler's research. "This young man has uncovered financial crimes we didn't even know existed. If this evidence checks out, it changes everything about your case." The FBI reopened their investigation with new energy. Tyler's research gave them roadmaps to hidden accounts they had never discovered. Within 6 weeks, federal agents were making arrests in 3 different countries. Daniel's criminal network was much larger than anyone had imagined. Daniel, who had been serving a comfortable sentence in minimum security prison, was suddenly facing additional charges that could keep him locked up for the rest of his life. When federal agents showed him the new evidence, he realized his situation was hopeless. "I want to make a deal," Daniel told his lawyer. "I'll cooperate fully if you can get me a reasonable sentence." Daniel's cooperation revealed the final pieces of the puzzle. He admitted that Catherine had been his partner from the very beginning. They had met at a business conference 3 years before she met Richard. Daniel had recruited her specifically to get close to Richard and gather inside information about his companies. She was the perfect partner, Daniel confessed to federal investigators. Beautiful, charming, and completely without conscience. Richard never suspected anything because he wanted to believe she loved him. Catherine's world collapsed overnight. Faced with evidence of her involvement in a 5-year criminal conspiracy, she had no choice but to cooperate with authorities. Her lawyer negotiated a plea agreement that would keep her out of prison, but only if she testified against Daniel and returned all the stolen money she could access. The criminal restitution process moved quickly once both defendants started cooperating. Federal agents recovered over $350 million from accounts around the world. Richard was not only vindicated, he was about to recover most of his stolen fortune. But the real victory came in family court. Linda, the nanny, who had been caring for Anna and Peter, testified about the children's emotional state during their separation from their father. She described how Anna cried herself to sleep asking for Daddy, how Peter had been having nightmares, how both children had been begging to see their father despite Catherine's efforts to turn them against him. The children love their father very much, Linda told the judge. They don't understand why they can't see him. Miss Catherine tells them he's too busy, but I see how sad they are without him. Rose and Tyler testified about Richard's transformation during the lowest period of his life. They described how he had rebuilt himself, not through selfishness, but through service to others. Rose told the court about Richard's volunteer work at the community college and his consulting business that helped small business owners protect themselves from financial fraud. This man learned from his mistakes and used that knowledge to help other people, Rose said firmly. That's not the behavior of someone who was part of a criminal conspiracy. That's the behavior of a victim who turned his pain into purpose. The judge was particularly impressed by Tyler's testimony. Here was a young man from a working-class family who had spent months of his life helping to uncover the truth, not for money, but because he believed in justice. Your Honor, Tyler said, Mr. Thompson lost everything, but he never lost his integrity. He could have accepted the settlement offer and gotten his life back months ago. Instead, he chose to keep fighting, because he knew other families needed to be protected from the same kind of criminals who destroyed his family. When Anna and Peter were finally allowed to speak to the judge privately, their words were heartbreaking and powerful. Despite being only 9 years old, they clearly expressed their desire to live with their father. Daddy never stopped calling. Us? Anna told the judge. Even when Mommy said he was too busy, he always called on Saturdays and Wednesdays. He remembers everything about us. My favorite color, my best friend's name, the song I was learning on piano. Peter was equally clear about his feelings. I want to live with Daddy. I miss him every day. He taught me how to ride my bike and throw a baseball. Mommy's always angry now, but Daddy makes me laugh. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. Richard was awarded primary custody of both children, with Catherine receiving supervised visitation rights. The court noted that Catherine's criminal behavior and deliberate efforts to alienate the children from their father made her an unfit primary guardian. 6 months later, Richard signed the papers to purchase a comfortable house in Rose's neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion, but it had a big backyard where Anna could practice soccer and Peter could play with his friends. Most importantly, it had a guest house where Rose and Tyler could live while Tyler finished his computer science degree. Richard's consulting business was thriving. His story of betrayal and recovery had spread throughout the business community, and entrepreneurs from across the country were hiring him to help them protect their companies and families from the kind of fraud he had experienced. Rose managed his busy schedule with the same care she had shown during his darkest days. Tyler had become his technology partner, developing software that helped small businesses detect suspicious financial activity. The federal government returned most of Richard's stolen money, but he discovered something surprising about wealth the second time around. Money felt different when you had earned it through helping others, rather than just making profits. Every dollar he made through his consulting business represented a family he had protected or a business owner he had taught to avoid financial predators. One Saturday morning, Richard was coaching Anna's soccer team while Rose and Tyler cheered from the sidelines. Peter was helping Tyler test a new app that detected financial fraud patterns. It was a perfect autumn day, with blue sky and golden leaves falling around the soccer field. "Daddy, are you happy now?" Anna asked him during halftime. Richard looked around at his new life. Rose was laughing at something Peter had said. Tyler was explaining computer code to a 9-year-old with the patience of a natural teacher. Anna was dirty and sweating from running around the soccer field, but she was smiling brighter than the sun. "I'm happier than I've ever been, sweetheart," Richard told her honestly. "Even without the big house and all those cars, especially without the big house and all those cars." That evening, the four of them sat around Richard's kitchen table, planning the expansion of their consulting business. Anna and Peter were helping Tyler design a website for kids that would teach them about money and how to avoid scams. Rose was reviewing applications for the scholarship fund Richard had established for students studying computer science and business ethics. As Richard watched his chosen family working together, he realized that losing everything had actually given him everything that truly mattered. Rose had been right that first night when she found him at his lowest point. Real wealth wasn't about having money. Real wealth was about having people in your life who would stand by you when you had nothing left to offer them except yourself.